film for the Latin American markets, which wanted to hear talking film spoken in their own language. Dubbing was still not an efficient and known commodity, and those studios that had the biggest interest in that market turned to doing secondary productions of their major films in Spanish versions for that market. Dracula was one of these pictures.
Soy Drácula. No podía usted ser más oportuno. No sé lo que pasaría con el cochero, con mi equipaje. Con todas esas cosas, creí que me había equivocado de casa.
The Spanish version of Dracula, directed by George Melford, was produced by Paul Kohner, an ambitious young protege of my uncle. His overall enthusiasm for the film may have had something to do with his feelings for his leading lady, the beautiful Mexican ingenue Lupita Tovar.
So the cast for the English version would come in the morning, started shooting at 8 o'clock, and the Spanish cast will come in the evening. We shot all night long till next morning because we use exactly the same sets.
Apparently what happened was that the initial crew, Browning's crew, would shoot these sequences. The second crew, the Spanish crew, would look at them and say to themselves, we can do better than that. And they would go and they would do better.
Something so incredible. I mistrust my own judgment. Mire.
Well, I don't think anybody's going to give any acting awards to Carlos Villarreal. But overall, the Spanish film is a real delight for film buffs because it's kind of like discovering all these fascinating new rooms in a familiar old house. And it's full of these wonderful optical effects and visuals that really seem ahead of their time.
What we do see in the Spanish version is, among other things, a much more artistic, a much more innovative use of camera movement in those early talkies, and that's not what we get in the Lugosi version at all. The camera movements are far more fluid, there's far more of them. It's a more lively film to watch unfold before your eyes than the Lugosi film. One only wishes that Lugosi had been directed in like fashion as the Spanish version.
Dracula did sensational box office, the result in part of Universal's atmospheric and imaginative promotion.
One of the most inventive designs of posters was Lugosi, arms upraised, clawing at the air behind a spider web in which various heads of his female victims were ensnared in the strands of the web like some sort of bizarre insects. So you had a whole bunch of different poster designs that sought to emphasize both the mystery and the underlying sexual content of this film. It was a very unique film in that sense.
Children are another category that found strong interest in Dracula. There was even a group of sociologists that studied movie responses to the various films of the early 30s, and often children would mention among their favorite movies, ones they liked to act out at home, was Dracula.
I remember early on being taken to other movies that he had made with some of my friends and classmates and whatnot, and they would always be frightened and hide behind the seats in the theater. And I would never be frightened because that was my father. That's who I'd see. But I remember when I was very young, I would try to imitate my father as Dracula, and I have some home movies that show that. So he showed me how he did it.
Certainly, more than any other performer, Bela Lugosi showed the world for all time how a vampire was supposed to look, how a vampire was supposed to act, and how a vampire was supposed to talk.
I have chartered a ship to take us to England. We will be leaving tomorrow evening.
I don't think Lugosi's face was as fascinating as Karloff's. In fact, I think Karloff probably would have made a good Dracula as well. But you know, that whole Hungarian accent and the way that he spoke and the weird rhythm of his speech and everything, I think is what people remember about Dracula.
He felt very strongly that in Dracula he had created a character that was quite different and far more powerful than the way he's described in Bram Stoker's novel. And that thereafter he would always be regarded as the Dracula, and Bela Lugosi would become synonymous Lugosi had a magic all his own. He was the kind of man who, when he walked into a room, even if it was a crowded room and nobody knew who he was, everybody would look and stare and turn around and say, well, who is that? He had that kind of a personality.
And especially in the horror film, where characters can be so larger than life, Lugosi probably seems to be about the darkest personality, the larger than life personality beyond any others I know of in the horror film, possibly in the cinema at large.
Many fine actors have played Dracula in recent years, and almost all of them play against the Lugosi characterization. But paradoxically, and I guess inevitably, they end up only bringing Lugosi to mind, because somehow we can't help but make that comparison in our minds.
Because of the success of the motion picture Dracula, he became so associated with that part that a lot of people regard him as Dracula, even though Dracula is a fictional person. And it changed his life. He was pretty much typecast after that, and when interviewed, he would say that Dracula is a blessing and a curse, and Dracula never dies. And really, that's what happened, and he carried that role to his death.
And I think going back and seeing these films is like a mini time capsule. It's also that way with collectors. We grew up loving these films. We weren't there on the set in 1931, but we want to be there so very much that we watch these films over and over. We wish to own a prop from them, or perhaps own a poster from them.
If there is a holy grail of Dracula collectibles, the Transylvanian Shroud of Turin, it would have to be Bela Lugosi's original Dracula cape.
My father had several different capes. Some were heavier material, some were lighter, depending upon where he was going to use it. I had one cape left, and my mother told me that this was the cape that he had worn in the motion picture Dracula. And I've had it independently verified that that is from the film. So it is one of America's rarest pieces of film history, and I really treasure it. My mother and myself had him buried in one of his capes. Not that he had ever expressed that wish, but we thought it would be appropriate.
Most all modern audiences haven't always seen Dracula, but certainly not the universal version with Lugosi. That's the image we carry of Dracula, of vampires. It's Universal's Dracula. It's Bela Lugosi.
Dracula has become one of the great media superstars of all time. There's a line from Macbeth, a play that Bram Stoker was very familiar with. And yet, who would have thought the old man to have had so much blood in him?
When Dracula was first released, it was accompanied by a final curtain speech read by the character of Professor Van Helsing. If memory serves, the good professor held up his hand and said, "Just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Just a word before you go. We hope the memories of Dracula won't give you bad dreams, so just a word of reassurance. When you get home tonight and the lights are turned out and you're afraid to look behind the curtains and you dread to see a face appear at the window, well, just pull yourself together and remember, after all,
there are such things.
There are such things.
There are such